This week on The Wheelhouse, beyond the two-party binary, independent, and third-party presidential candidates. For Connecticut Public, I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse, the show that connects politics to the people. We got your weekly dose of politics in Connecticut and beyond right here. We're going to be heading to the polls in, just about 7 months. And we're likely going to have more than one Republican and one Democrat on our ballots. Third party and independent candidates like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Cornel West, and Jill Stein are seeing this presidential election as a moment of opportunity. Could a minor party candidate win this thing? Is dissatisfaction with the two major parties high enough? That's what we're diving into today on The Wheelhouse. Joining me, we have Saleha Mohsin, senior Washington correspondent for Bloomberg News and host of the Big Take DC podcast. Welcome, Saleha. How are you this morning?
So excited to be here.
Excited to have you on. Thank you for coming on. Also with us, Stephen K. Medvick, Kunkel Professor of Government at Franklin and Marshall College. Thanks for being here, Stephen.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for coming on. And last, certainly not least, Wheelhouse host emerita. Emeritus. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And also host of the mega popular, mega successful Colin McEnroe show on Connecticut Public. Colin McEnroe.
I'm very excited to be back. My counselors at Betty Ford said I was cleared to come back here. So here I am. Yeah, I was on the show every week for 7 years. It's strange.
Do we need a safe word?
No, I'm good.
Okay,
I'm good.
He's good. He's not going to be triggered. Okay. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. I got to start off with a little history 101. Stephen, you're going to get this. Democrat versus Republican. We know this as like the two-party system. How long has it been like this in America?
You want me to answer, or you?
Yeah, you got it. You got it. That's for you. That's for you.
Yeah. It's been that way. It's been that way since about 1860, late 1850s, when the Republican Party, which started as a third party, replaced the Whigs as one of the other major parties, and since then we've kind of had a two-party, the particular two-party system we have now. It's been frozen in place.
But before that, we essentially had two parties, right? As a precursor.
Yeah, we've always basically had two parties.
Yep.
So right after the founding period, parties formed, really quickly. Around the second or third Congress, you started to have party formation. And at first you had what were called the Democratic Republicans or the Jeffersonian Republicans versus the Federalists. We went through a period of about a decade and a half called the Era of Good Feelings, when we only had one major party. But after that, we formed a two-party system again. It was the Democrats and the Whigs. And then, as I said, the Whigs were replaced by the Republicans, and we've had that ever since.
And I want to get to sort of precedent. When was the last time we had a non-Democrat in name, non-Republican as a president? And would they have been considered a independent or a third-party candidate?
No, they wouldn't have been. That's a good question. I'm not a historian, so I'm having to flip back through my brain to the middle of the 1800s when we would have had a Whig president, but They would have been one of the two major parties. So we've never had a third party candidate become president, because even when Lincoln won in 1860, by then the Republicans were the other major party.
So we did that little history lesson to kind of get closer to today. People, I saw this in the Washington Post, are drawing parallels in polls this year to when Ross Perot ran in the 1990s. What do you think about that connection, Stephen? And then I'll open it up after that.
Yeah, so Perot ran in 92 as an independent and got 19% of the vote. Historically, pretty high. It's as high as any third party candidate has gotten since 1912, when former President Teddy Roosevelt ran as a third party candidate and got about 27% of the vote. So that showing for Perot in 92 was really strong. He didn't win any electoral votes, though. The last third-party candidate to win electoral votes was George Wallace back in 1968. He won 5 states. And so, but then in 96, when Perot ran again, he was then running as a third-party candidate, the Reform Party, which formed out of his 92 campaign. That time he only got 8% of the vote, though. So his showing in 92 was relatively strong.
Stephen talked about George Wallace there. I think we did a little pre-interview together, Colin. What do you think about George Wallace and the parallels? That may be more apt than a Ross Perot comparison?
Well, it's apt in one way and inept in another one. It's apt in the sense that those 46 votes that 46 electoral votes that Stephen talked about are just the beginning of that story. One of the fears that you have to have about a third-party candidate who actually does get electoral votes, which is exceedingly rare. And it's not going to happen this time. I think it's very unlikely that it'll happen this time. Mm-hmm. But in the case of Wallace, we were very close to what's called a contingent election. If no candidate gets 270 electoral votes, the election tips into the House. The House chooses the president. The Senate chooses the vice president. They're chosen by delegations. So in other words, California and Alabama each get 1 vote, at least under the current rules. It's just a very wacky way to choose a president. I don't think anybody who's watched the House of Representatives recently wants this to happen. But, in the case of Wallace, Nixon got 301 electoral votes. That's not too many over 270. You can look at some of the close states in that election and say, wow, you could move a few thousand votes here and there. We could have wound up with a contingent election. So, I mean, that's kind of illustrative that way. But the reason he got so many electoral votes is his support was all concentrated in a handful of Deep South states. So you could win electoral votes, whereas Perot, probably a little bit more similar to RFK Jr. or anybody else who might run this time, his support was spread across all 50 states and never high enough to take a state. Obviously, now there are now 2 states that award electoral votes proportionally. So, I mean, maybe you could pick one off that way. But, very, very hard to win the electoral votes if you're, pulling sort of 15% or something like that.
You recently had the chance to talk to Connecticut's own Ralph Nader, Saleha. He ran for president on the Green Party ticket in 2000. What happened during that election, and what role did Ralph Nader play in it?
Well, Ralph Nader ran in a 3-way race, in theory, against Al Gore and George W. Bush. And of course, that was the infamous hanging Chad election. But what ended up happening was that it looked like because the vote came down to something like 537 ballots in Florida between Gore and Bush. And in that same state, Nader got more than 97,000 votes. The case was made, and his critics said that Nader spoiled the election for Al Gore. And Nader and I talked about this. It's an idea that he has rejected for the past quarter of a century, poor guy, saying that neither I nor other third parties are spoilers for Republicans and Democrats. Rather, we campaign and we bring to the fore issues that the major parties are not talking about, but that the electorate wants.
Yeah, if I could just jump in here for a second. I think there's also been, Saleha, a little bit of a sense, looking back and doing a little bit of analysis of those numbers from 2000, that the problem wasn't entirely Ralph Nader, that there were maybe around 300,000 votes in Florida that were Clinton votes that defected to Bush. And I think one of the things, sort of historically Clinton votes that then went to Bush. I think if Ralph had an effect on that election, it might have been a more subtle one, which is that his argument that there wasn't any real difference between the two parties, that both parties were in the thrall of big money, of corporate interests, made it a little bit more fluid. It may have sort of contributed to people's ability to defect from one position to another. If you believe that there isn't a dime's worth of difference, a term that Ralph did use, between the two parties, it's maybe a little easier to move around with your affiliations.
Well, absolutely. Nader did talk to me about how he thinks tens of thousands of Americans would have just stayed home in 2000 if Nader hadn't been running. And he pointed out that historically, third parties have changed America. They were the first out of the box that were against slavery, the first for the right for women to vote, and the first to fight for unions to be able to organize. And the list goes on.
So does Ralph think, in talking to him, does he think that an independent party or third party candidate stands a chance, Saleha?
this is why I talked to him. I wanted to know in a year where people are so unhappy with the two options that are before them, is this the year for the third party win? And he said no, unequivocally no, because he said, for one thing, most Americans have been taught from elementary school that either a Democrat or a Republican is going to win, and people want to vote for a real potential winner. The other thing that he pointed out was that there are endless roadblocks for a third party candidate. Republicans and Democrats automatically, get onto the ballot pretty much by default. Third parties have to circulate petitions, get thousands of signatures, pay for all of that just to have their names appear on the ballot. And that's just one of the obstacles.
We know a third-party candidate hasn't won the presidential election, I guess, generally speaking. Do third-party candidates shake up the process, guys? I'm going to open this up to whoever wants to jump in.
Oh, well, obviously, it does shake up the process. We've had some electoral cycles now where the margins in states are like 20,000 votes in some of the swing states. So somebody who comes in there in a disruptive way can do that. You certainly also see it. You can even see it here in Connecticut. I mean, I would argue that in addition to all the other effects that George Wallace had, he probably gave Connecticut, for example, to Hubert Humphrey. I think Nixon probably would have won that state that year. So yeah, they are disruptive. They scare people. I'm sure we'll get to this. RFK scares both sides right now. They don't understand. Nobody understands what his real impact is, and he's kind of a chimera. He's like a griffin or a manticore. He's got the head of a Democrat and the body of a conspiracy nut and the tail of a conventional Republican. And so, what is he? Who is he going to hurt? But I mean, typically you can sort of see. And probably as we get closer to Election Day, we'll be able to see the impact that he and other potential third-party candidates will have on the vote.
We're going to talk about RFK in the next segment, but he certainly seems to satisfy maybe the Joe Rogan incel type crowd there. But Stephen, what do you think here about third-party candidates and what they might offer?
Yeah, the thing about their impact electorally. I mean, because I think it's true that they have an impact on the discourse. I mean, Perot in '92 talked about the deficit, and it became something that Clinton had to think about and address when he became president. So they often, they don't always, but they often bring new issues and new policy discussions into the debate, which is a good thing. I'm not really sure, to be honest, what RFK, for example, what new issues he's hoping to get people to talk about. I mean, we know why he's pretty famous right now, but I'm not sure that's a kind of platform that
he wants you to read the box when you get the vaccine or the
you
got to read the box.
I guess. I mean, that seems that doesn't seem like a presidential candidate's platform. It doesn't seem like it rises to that level, but maybe it does. But, electorally, they do seem to have an impact. It's just hard to know exactly what that impact is because, as Nader suggested, a lot of the voters who are going to vote third party would either stay home or they just skip the presidential race if they were really disgusted with the two major party candidates. Still, when it's really close, like 500 and something votes in Florida in 2000, or a couple of tens of thousands of votes in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan in 2016, you got to think that some of those voters wouldn't skip the race, wouldn't stay home. They would vote for one of the two major party candidates. And so they probably are affecting the outcome. It's just hard to know exactly precisely how.
Saleha, you want to say anything before we button up this segment?
Well, I mean, it's really easy for one of the Main Street candidates, if and when one person loses or is on the brink of losing, who knows when we're going to actually get an election result in this crazy year. But it's very easy for either Biden or Trump to say, well, I've got the perfect scapegoat, no labels, or whoever the third party candidate might end up being, I'm just going to blame them. So there's also, that's something that when at my conversation with Nader last month, he pushed back against it. Oh, everyone's always going to look to us as the boogeyman if we finally make it on the national stage.
I'm going to read an email before we get out of here. It comes from Cassandra Martineau to wheelhouse@ctpublic.org. She says, I have been a member and occasional leader of the Green Party in Connecticut. 40 years of political triangulation have led to many Democrats landing to the right of Ronald Reagan, lowering taxes and regulations on corporations and the wealthiest while reducing services for those in greatest need. In their quest for Republican voters, Democrats have abandoned the left. I don't believe they will respond to us unless we threaten their power. So that's one person's perspective here as we end our segment. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is The Wheelhouse. I'm Frankie Graziano. We just took a historical look into America's two-party system. Coming up, introducing you to the down ballot class of 2024. This is The Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. We're talking down ballot candidates for president today, joined by Saleha Mohsin, Stephen K. Medvick, and Connecticut Public's own Colin McEnroe. Right now, we're introducing 3 down ballot candidates who might shake up the 2024 presidential election. We're going to get into it further here. You want to join the conversation? Give us a call, please. 888-720-9677. 888-720-9677. Colin, we're going to get to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. now. He declared his independent candidacy in April of last year, and he certainly hasn't shied away from his namesake. Take a listen to this ad that played during the Super Bowl.
Kennedy, 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 Kennedy.
Kennedy Jr.'s family, I guess, voiced anger in response to the ad and called his superimposed face over JFK as disrespectful. What happened here? Why is it jarring to see him compared to JFK?
Well, there's some ways in which the comparison makes sense. I mean, starting with the last name, obviously, but also some of RFK's positions they're not just, maybe JFK positions. They're nearly Bernie Sanders positions. He's got stuff like pushing the mortgage rate down to 3%, free child care, and the possibility of discharging student debt through bankruptcy. And he's also an absolutely unmistakable, undeniable, serious environmentalist, always has been. And if you go and you look at the way, for example, he's been presenting himself on TikTok, which his team has been using pretty effectively, the thing about TikTok is there's no context. You go on there as RFK and you do a 2-minute thing about Purple Mountain's majesty, and that's all anybody knows. They don't have the context to go with it. So he's got all of that kind of stuff that would track pretty well, and the physical fitness stuff is, in fact, all the push-ups he's doing and stuff like that. That's also kind of a callback to JFK and Go Chicken Fat Go and all the physical fitness stuff from that administration. Where he goes off track is a whole bunch of other places, starting obviously with vaccine science. But it's not
including
just
the fitness stuff, though, too. That's some of the vaccine science stuff, don't put that into your body, kind of.
Right. I think that's true. The vaccine stuff isn't really restricted to simply talking about how dangerous the COVID vaccine is. And it goes into other areas. He's used
Gardasil. That's my. I met RFK Jr. At the state capitol in Connecticut. He said in public, and this was even easy for my dumb brain to comprehend. He said that 1 out of 2 women that take it will get an autoimmune disease. So obviously I had to push back against that one.
He said there's stuff in the drinking water that maybe turning kids into transgender people. I mean, it's like on and on. It's 5G stuff. It's really quite kind of a dog's dinner of those kinds of conspiracy theories. And I'll say one more thing and then I'll shut up, which is that, and I think our other 2 guests would agree with, we're all election nerds, right? We're election nerds. We're paying a lot of attention to this stuff. Most of the country's pretty checked out right now. People start paying attention to election cycles a little bit after Labor Day. So all of the context that goes with RFK, to understand him, you have to understand all of these contradictions, the things that might be very appealing and the things that also might be very, very unappealing. And it's, I think for the most part, not there. He's been going on a lot of podcasts where he doesn't get fact-checked, particularly on Rogan. And he's been doing a lot of stuff on TikTok, which, as I say, is sort of a good place to put yourself forth as a single-issue person. I'm assuming September, October, people really start to get to know him and decide whether they can live with the cuckoo bird stuff to get the other stuff that they like.
Stephen Saleha, who's going to vote for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Is he more likely to sway dissatisfied Trump or Biden voters? What do you think?
Well, I think it looks like, I mean, at the moment, he looks like he's drawing about evenly from the two, maybe a little bit more from Biden right now. And that's why I think the Democrats have already put together, an organized effort to try to push back against him and other third-party candidates or independent candidates. I mean, they are, it is true that once the campaign kicks in, and it'll probably be sooner rather than later. I don't think they'll wait till the fall. They're just gonna pound, especially Kennedy, but the other potential third party candidates, with ads that there's multi-million, maybe close to $1 billion worth of money sitting around waiting to campaign against these people. So I don't know who will vote for him in the end. It would be people who are really disaffected with both candidates, both major party candidates. But by the time we get to November, I suspect there won't be nearly as many as there are now, and there may not be that many overall.
And the interesting thing to watch for is whether either candidate in the mainstream, Trump or Biden, acknowledges RFK, and Biden already has, which in and of itself legitimizes the effort and makes it appear as if it's a real threat, whether it is or not. If the Biden campaign is expounding money and effort on RFK Jr., then there is this appearance of, okay, this is real. And then maybe it actually piques the attention of someone who is unhappy or unsatisfied with the two options in front of them, even more so.
Who was sitting next to Joe Biden during the State of the Union?
I've forgotten.
It was Maria Shriver.
It was Maria Shriver. That's right. Okay.
That's a shot against an RFK right there. They're cousins.
Saleha, to your point, I think we can already see this by proxies that they're both scared. In the case, like yesterday, with the announcement of Nicole Shanahan as Kennedy's running mate, I get emails. I just signed up for things so I can find out what they're saying. There's one group called Make America Great Again, which is a proxy fundraising group for Trump. They were just crapping all over Kennedy and the running mate. They clearly and what Biden is doing and what Biden's doing through proxies is just plowing the road. Their whole theory is let's keep all these third party candidates off the ballot wherever possible. Who knows whether they're going to hurt us or help us? But we'd rather run a clear one-on-one election. So they've got a group. I think it's called Clear Choice. It's a bunch of Biden donors who are trying to keep third party candidates of all kinds off ballots.
Yeah, and as Saleha mentioned earlier, that ballot access is really difficult for third parties, and we're seeing that this year. So even if the Democrats say weren't contesting ballot access in the courts, it's just hard. It's organizationally hard to get on the ballot as a third party candidate. So you have to have a lot of money, which Kennedy will have, but you also have to have a lot of organization. So at the moment, he's on the ballot. He's qualified for the ballot just in Utah. Now he's likely to get on ballots other places, but he's already running into trouble in Nevada and a couple of other places. So we don't even know where he'll be on the ballot yet.
We've got a lot to talk about besides RFK Jr. here. This is an exciting conversation, but we got to talk about another candidate, Jill Stein, who's running as the Green Party candidate. I want to play a clip from her campaign video to get your reactions. Go ahead.
The political system is broken. The two Wall Street parties are bought and paid for. Over 60% of us now say the bipartisan establishment's failed us, and we need a party that serves the people. I'm Jill Stein, and I'm running for president to offer that choice for the people outside of the failed two-party system.
This is the Nader candidate, right? This is the Green Party candidate. So what kind of parallels can we draw maybe there, or just get your general reactions to this clip, guys?
I'll go first. So the Green Party has ballot access. They're already on the Connecticut ballot, for example. They have ballot access. I don't think they have a great candidate there. There's some bad feelings, some bad taste left over from 2016. Hillary Clinton called Jill Stein a Russian asset. There was a sense that maybe, in fact, in terms of Russian interference, one of the things they were doing was kind of a pump and dump with Stein's candidacy. I don't think Cassandra Martin or whatever her name is going to get really mad about this. I think the bloom has gone a little bit off the Green Party rose for that reason. But I'd like to hear what the other panelists have to say.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I think that this is just another sign of the double hater theme that we're seeing. This is a term that's newer this year. Pollsters are using this term double hater for people who have an unfavorable opinion for both Biden and Trump. And that's like 18 to 20% of the electorate, depending on what poll you look at, it could be higher. There's a fatigue around here. And so now we're seeing more and more issue candidates jump up. So Jill Stein comes up. She is championing a couple of key issues, taking the baton from the Green Party and Ralph Nader and her predecessors and seeing what she can advocate on. But again, it's the same question of the roadblocks of funding, of getting on a ballot, of trying to break it into the mainstream and get some attention.
Yeah, and in 2016, there were a lot of double haters in 2016 as well, and Jill Stein got 1% nationally. Again, she may have had a big impact in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, so it's not to discount it. But, this year is similar to 2016 in that sense that there are a lot of disaffected voters. But in 2016, the grand total of votes for non-major party candidates was 5%. And that included Gary Johnson, a libertarian. There'll be a libertarian on the ballot in lots of states this year as well. So it looks a lot like 2016, and that would be my assumption going into to this year, but we'll see.
What about the environmental factor? We get that a little bit with RFK. So what about this with Jill Stein? Is this something that can help her since environmental issues are top of mind, especially for younger Americans?
Yeah, I mean, you would assume, and that that would probably attract a number of young voters for whom climate change is the most important issue. But the Biden administration's done quite a bit on that score, and they'll tout that during the campaign. So they may be able to sort of blunt that appeal. Of course, it's not enough for Jill Stein and for the Green Party, but it's quite a bit, relatively speaking. In mainstream politics and historically, he's done quite a bit. So I think he's kind of covered himself there with those voters quite well.
And then
that's one of the things one of the things that Nader and other, Ross Perot, other third party candidates who have made a name for themselves have pointed out that Nader said, I ran because I thought I could nudge the candidates on an issue. So if Jill Stein gets out there, gets enough traction amongst climate focused voters to nudge the debate to get Biden to talk more about it, that's impact right there.
Mm-hmm. And then there's Cornel West. Let's listen to a clip from his campaign video.
In these bleak times, I have decided to run for truth and justice, which takes the form of running for president of the United States as a candidate for the People's Party. I enter into quest for truth. I enter into quest for justice. And the presidency is just one vehicle to pursue that truth and justice, what I've been trying to do all of my life.
Can we apply truth and justice? Anybody want to take this? Can we apply truth and justice to what we're seeing out of the other two candidates? Is there anything there, or is this more of what Cornel West is talking about, his traditional kind of platform that he's tried to use?
Maybe I can start. One thing I would say about Cornel West, the thing that should scare Biden about him is that Cornel West has been a Palestinian advocate for a really long time. Stephen was talking about the importance of climate change to on college campuses and with young people. Young people right now are absolutely jacked up about the humanitarian crisis. Parenthetically, I should say that Robert F. Kennedy has been traditionally an Israel hawk. RFK Jr. has been an Israel hawk. He once referred to the Palestinians as the most pampered global minority in terms of the attention they get. This is pre-crisis, but in terms of humanitarian aid, I don't know how much of that he can walk back. But West could go into a place like Michigan, play up that side of him. He's been a real advocate for that. It's a vulnerability that we know that Biden has, especially in Michigan. And that's a problem Biden is going to have to solve. I'm sure he's going to move a little bit towards the center with his own position, but the guy who could cause the trouble for him, the person who could cause the trouble for him with it, is probably West.
Yeah, that's probably right. But again, I still think he's got a ballot access issue.
Yes.
He's not going to have as much money or organization as RFK, and so whatever problems RFK's having, Cornel West will have double or triple that trouble. So but I think you're right in terms of appealing to that particular issue, because right now, we've seen the number of uncommitted voters in places like Michigan relatively high, although I have to say that not that much higher than in years past, like even in 2008. When Obama was running for re-election. So, I wouldn't overemphasize that those uncommitted voters, it's just an easy way to register a complaint. But that complaint is real right now, and the Biden people have to pay attention to it. A lot can change though between now and November. A lot will change. And as important as an issue as this is, if circumstances change, it may reduce the saliency of that issue for a lot of voters.
New York Times saying it's something at like 13% that uncommitted vote nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
It's early times. It's early days. There's going to be a richer information climate post Labor Day. And we'll see where we are then. And some of these issues will kind of flesh out. And as Stephen is suggesting too, facts on the ground are going to change. The conversations we're having right now are conversations taking place in March. In September, we're going to be living in a slightly or maybe drastically different world.
I want to push this. Go ahead, Saleha.
Well, and that's the whole point, right? I think Stephen said it earlier on the show that we're all sitting here, we're policy wonks, political wonks, and news junkies, but the electorate, these undecideds, are really going to start paying attention in September. So it's kind of like we have to see, can some of these candidates like Jill Stein and Cornel West, RFK Jr., do they have the stamina and the steam to make it to September and slowly play the long game, build up their appeal, and then catch voters right when they're making their decision?
Maybe we'll try to figure out in the next segment where these voters could go come September. Just before we do finish this up, one of the ways to be a successful candidate, maybe through funding, but one group that is hoping to capitalize off of the dissatisfaction surrounding the two major party candidates, a group we even alluded to earlier today, No Labels. What is that group, and what is their goal, and how successful have they been so far?
Well, they're attempting to put together what they call a unity ticket. So it would be a Democrat and a Republican, or a former Democrat and former Republican who would run as president and vice president. The problem for them is they're having real difficult time finding two people who are willing to do that. And they've struck out, all the overtures they've made to potential candidates have been rebuffed. Right now, they're operating as not really as a political party, but as a nonprofit organization, a 501c4. And they don't have to disclose their funding. So nobody really knows where the money's coming from. There have been leaks about, potential donors to that effort, including Harlan Crow. But right now they're trying to get ballot access. I think they're actually on the ballot in 18 states, but they're trying to find a candidate to be on the ticket, and they've been unsuccessful to this point.
Saleha, jump in here.
I asked Ralph Nader about No Labels, and his quote is, "Well, who knows what it is? They don't have a candidate." And to me, that's really revealing, right? No one knows who or what they are. Somehow they have resonated where people now think of third party, that term, that party name, whatever they are, it comes up, No Labels. I mean, I sat across the table at dinner with New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu a couple of months ago, and there were GOP folks, strategists who were encouraging him to either run on the Republican ticket. Now, this was before Trump was sort of mostly decided, or saying, hey, why not No Labels? We had Larry Hogan, the former governor of Maryland, who's well-liked, who's kind of in the middle compared to candidates these days. And people are asking him, please, hey, why aren't you considering No Labels? And each of them slowly just ruled it out. So you just have to wonder, why can't anything stick with this group?
Well, another person they tried to woo a little bit was Nikki Haley. They floated the idea. And Nikki Haley said no, but I don't know if that's a hard no. And if Nikki Haley were to go with them, we would have to have this conversation all over again. I think you have a very different landscape at this point. I will also just quickly say, of course, we're here in Connecticut. It's kind of a third-party paradise, a little Weicker one with a Connecticut party, and then his lieutenant governor, Eunice Rourke, ran for governor 4 years later as a Connecticut party candidate unsuccessfully. But Joe Lieberman, who's very heavily involved in this whole No Labels movement, people might remember in 2006, a young upstart named Ned Lamont won the Democratic senatorial nomination, trying to upset the incumbent Lieberman. He formed Connecticut for Lieberman, a party which, by the way, he never joined. He never gave up his existing registration. So the party was actually hijacked by people who didn't like Lieberman years later because he had no control over it. But so I don't know. Whenever I see Joe Lieberman's fingerprints on something, I get a little suspicious. But I'm inclined to agree with Stephen. This is a black box. We really don't know where all this dark money is coming from or what their ultimate goal is.
It really is, and there's now a super PAC supporting the effort called No Leaders 24 or New Leaders 24, and I just don't. I think part of the problem with attracting candidates is that it's been mysterious. No one really knows what the organization's like. It doesn't really look like a third party. I mean, RFK and Cornel West are really candidate-centered efforts. They are personalities who are leading their candidacies. The Green Party, the Libertarian Party are legitimate parties. They are organizations that run candidates up and down the ballot. Nobody really knows what No Labels is. They don't have the personality leading them, but they're not a party either. So that's their problem.
Real quickly, what about the Party for Socialism and Liberation? Maybe libertarians getting on the ticket in some states and maybe in a lot of states. What do we think about other potential third-party candidates?
Well, I mean, libertarians have a lot of ballot access because they run all the time. Since Lyndon LaRouche and all those guys, they don't have. They don't have. I mean, they flirted with RFK. You got to give credit to the libertarians. They really do insist that you be a libertarian if you're going to be their candidate. So I don't know. They got some 37-year-old guy who's probably going to be the candidate this year. I don't think they'll be a factor.
Yeah, can I say one thing? There's also there's the Forward Party, which is Andrew Yang's effort. I think they're approaching it in a really interesting way. They are not running a presidential candidate, but they are going into states and they're trying to get candidates who will run kind of attached to their label, not necessarily as with the Forward Party designation, but saying they are in agreement with the Forward Party. So they are doing the kind of bottom up, not quite grassroots, but kind of grassroots organizing that if you really want to have a true political party that has any kind of sustainability over time, you have to roll up your sleeves and do the organizing. And the Forward Party seems to be trying that.
Here's the thing, though. If we take our camera lens and shift it to what is it that the electorate is asking for? Now, we only know from polls. Polls tell us what people think in that moment, not what they're going to think necessarily in November. But still, we know the economy is a big deal. We know overseas threats are a big deal. We know democracy, abortion. These are some of the issues that are on people's minds. And all of these things require some level of transparency, knowing who is the human being that you are saying should sit behind the Resolute desk in Washington in the Oval Office. And if No Labels is the kind of party that can't offer that transparency, we can't tell you who the candidate is, we can't tell you where we're getting our money from, and we don't really have ballot access, there's a lot missing before they can get traction.
That was beautifully put.
Thank you so much, Saleha. That's a great way to go to our next and final break here. Coming up, more on down ballot candidates and how they could influence the presidential election. We want to hear from you. 888-720-9677, 888-720-9677. This is the Wheelhouse from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Frankie Graziano. So far, third-party and independent candidates for president are doing well against Donald Trump and Joe Biden, but is this something that can continue come November? Could Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Cornel West, Jill Stein, or none of the above upset America's two-party system? We're going to get into the nitty-gritty right now with Saleha Mohsin, senior Washington correspondent for Bloomberg News, Stephen K. Medvick, the Honorable and Mrs. John C. Kunkel Professor of Government at Franklin and Marshall College, and Colin McEnroe, the Wheelhouse host emeritus, host of the Colin McEnroe Show on Connecticut Public. Join the conversation if you want, 888-720-9677. Saleha, let's bring the conversation to today. Voters considering an alternative candidate, perhaps. Are they doing it maybe more than in past elections? What's happening here?
I think when you're in the moment, everything feels more than ever before. So there have been other times that the electorate has been unhappy. I think the interesting thing is that we're a strong democracy, and part of that strength lies in being really self-critical. And we are in a very self-critical moment right now. It's the kind of thing that plays out on the national stage, on the global stage. Everybody watches as the rhetoric gets nasty, as partisan divides get deeper and more ideological, and shift from economic issues to social issues, as we're seeing. One thing I hold on to is that we've been here before, not this exact same spot, but in decades past, things have been really ugly and we've found our way back to it. So I think all of this talk about third-party candidates has a lot to do with that, and the fact that for some reason these two mainstream parties that we've had that have ruled America for decades and decades and decades, Republicans and Democrats, have two really old people running, and they're not representative of what the electorate is right now. And there's just this confusion of how come this amazing country that rules the world, has so much innovation, can't come up with more interesting candidates that really jazz up the electorate.
Let me stay with you for a second, though, because I think it was earlier, maybe even Stephen said this earlier. We talked about, I know you were talking about Ralph Nader earlier, Saleha, jumping in to push an issue. And maybe Jill Stein can do that with something like the climate change issues that we have in the United States and in the world beyond, obviously. So if they don't necessarily win this third party or independent candidate, can they push the Democratic and Republican establishment? Can they actually have an impact beyond just not winning, I guess?
You know, we've been talking about this for decades. The U.S. has, and you know, political scientists. Can third parties have an impact? And Nader did highlight, like I said earlier, that it was third parties that first called to abolish slavery and make a lot of other big societal shifts. I don't know if that's what we're going to see now. It's hard to predict. I think people are unhappy. People want change, something different, but also it's a precarious moment in the world. This is the first time in 7 or 8 decades that the sort of the world order is being broken apart. So is this the moment to be looking at domestic issues? Is it the moment to look at overseas issues? Don't we need a strong electorate and economy and political system to remain a superpower? So I think all of these larger themes, such big themes, are kind of at play when we come down to this other issue of third-party candidates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you know, campaigns are about sharpening choices, and so I just keep coming back to the fact that, you know, we have barely begun this campaign. It'll heat up pretty quickly, you know, again, well before Labor Day, although it's true that most voters won't really pay attention until after Labor Day. But the two major party candidates are going to sharpen the choices. It'll be clear what the choices are on a whole range of issues. And, you know, keep in mind that a lot of voters don't really vote on issues. I mean, some voters do, and some issues are important to them specifically, but it's more of a kind of global choice that they're making. And, you know, when the choice really comes down to Biden and the Democrats and Trump and the Republicans, you know, a lot of those voters who right now are sort of playing with the idea of a third party candidate will say the choice is too important. And so I fully expect. It's not to say that the third party candidates might not have an impact, because in battleground states, they may well. But, you know, I'd be surprised if the total of third party votes gets anywhere above, like in 2016, above 5%.
You know, one thing we haven't mentioned is debates. Debates often have the effect of sharpening focus, sharpening issues, sharpening perceptions of candidates, although you could argue that the perceptions of Trump and Biden are already pretty hardened off with most people. An interesting question is, could RFK qualify for debates? Another interesting question is, are there going to be debates? Republican Party officially withdrew from the Commission on Presidential Debates in 2022. Biden hasn't committed to the idea of a debate, but a debate that featured the three of them could actually, I mean, in addition to being a completely terrifying, nightmarish event, could maybe change some people's minds or send us off in an unanticipated direction.
That is a far cry from where we are now, Stephen, the 5% from 18%, where some of these, and again, it's just it's an early poll where we're talking about maybe Cornel West, Jill Stein, and RFK getting maybe 18 to 20%. But another figure I want to talk about, and I mentioned this earlier, the New York Times recently publishing an article finding 1 in 10 Democratic voters voting uncommitted in states where that's an option on the primary ballot. Stephen, we know we want to talk a little bit more about this. We were talking about how this for young people represents an opportunity to push back against what's happening in Gaza and also to push back against what's happening in the country. So will these people vote for President Biden at the end of the day, or could they end up voting for a third party or independent candidate?
Well, we don't know, which is not a satisfying answer. But the reason we don't know is because those uncommitted votes, as I said earlier, it's really just registering a complaint. But, you know, the vote is a blunt instrument. It says, okay, I'm not willing to say I want Biden to be the nominee, but it doesn't tell you why. And so, you know, much of that we can read context clues and say a lot of that is probably Gaza, but maybe it's age. You know, maybe it's some other issue that people are upset about. As I said, if you go back to 2008, there was a pretty considerable uncommitted vote against Obama. And we think back, you know, that Obama was, you know, the Democrats' favorite president in recent memory. And he was. But there was, you know, when an incumbent's running for re-election, there are inevitably going to be people who say, well, I'm not crazy about him. I'd rather have somebody else. And so it's an easy way to vote, to register that complaint at the primary stage. But do all of those people, are they so angry with him that they won't come back home in the fall? Again, I'm really skeptical. But again, if it's just even a fraction of them and they're in key swing states, it could make the difference. So, you know, it's simultaneously not going to be as significant as it looks right now, but could still be determinative of the outcome of the election.
We only have about 3 minutes left. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw a whole bunch of stuff at you guys. And then I'm going to give you guys each 30 seconds to tell me what could possibly, not necessarily happen, but what we should look for, okay? So No Label still doesn't have their candidate. We wonder if there's a Ralph Nader in here. Ralph Nader maybe unfairly has been in the past criticized of costing Gore the election in 2000. And, of course, there's the possibility of a contingent election. There's uncommitted. So I'll start first with Saleha. Give you about 30 seconds to tell me what to look out for here in the next 7 months or so.
You know, I'm curious about the silence in this election. Are we going to just see the lowest turnout that we've ever had? And what does that silence and what does that, you know, sort of refraining from going to the polls on election day tell us about what the American people want, whether our two-party system is able to deliver options that work, and what that means for the next 4 years?
Stephen.
I say watch the campaign. Let's see how the debate unfolds. How is the choice constructed by the two major party candidates? There are a lot of really, really salient issues to people that we haven't talked about. Abortion, for example. Last night in Alabama, a state house seat flipped from Republican to Democrat with a huge swing in the Democrats' direction over the IVF issue. So, you know, this campaign is going to sharpen those choices. And as it does, I think you'll see in the polls the third-party candidates fade. They won't go away, but they won't be nearly as significant as they seem to be right now.
Colin.
I kind of agree with that last part of what he just said. I think this is going to be a two-person race. I mean, RFK, it's hard to predict, but I think it's going to be a two-person race. I think you're going to see enthusiasm being the currency that people are after. Trump generates his own kind of enthusiasm. We just mentioned Obama. I can almost guarantee you Obama is going to do a big tour on behalf of Biden. He's going to go to cities, and he's going to tell them it does matter. You got to get out and vote. This is an existential election. So, yeah, I mean, the truth is we don't know anything. My March Madness bracket is busted. I don't know anything.
Stephen Medvick, thank you so much from Franklin and Marshall College. Thank you so much for coming on. Saleha Mohsin from Bloomberg, thank you so much. And Colin McEnroe, listen to Colin's show today at 1 o'clock if you're listening on the first run. Thank you for coming on, Colin. Today's show, produced by Chloe Wynn, my partner in bringing politics to the people, edited by Meg Dalton. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes, the maestro. Thanks to Lamia Sorella, Tess Terrible on the phones today. Our executive producer is my boss, Katie Tolarski. Download The Wheelhouse anytime on your favorite podcast app. I'm Frankie Graziano. This is The Wheelhouse. Thank you for listening.